But I think we should start. Yeah, we have a very impressive panel, so I'd like to have enough time for the panel and also for you to discuss with the panel. My name is Sylvia Schwag-Serger. I'm adjunct professor here in research policy in Lund, and I'm also responsible for international strategy at the Swedish Government Agency for Innovation. And I've been working with policymaking for about 15 years, and for 15 years, ever since I left my PhD at the London School of Economics, I've been trying to link academia and policymaking more closely together. So I find this seminar extremely interesting. And I find particularly this panel very interesting. So the title is The Challenge of Responding to the Increased Globalization of Economic Activities and Mobility of Talent. This is, I would say, a very topical issue from the point of view of policymaking, and maybe we'll get back to that. But as an example, I can mention that Vinnova has its annual conference next Tuesday, and the topic is actually about internationalization of innovation, and it's about the title of our conference is Sweden attractive enough for global talent, for innovative people and companies? So the issue of attractiveness, which is perhaps something we'll also get back to, which is very relevant from the point of view of policymaking. The title, The Challenge of Responding to the Increased Globalization of Economic Activities and Mobility of Talent, I was sort of wondering whose challenge? Is it the challenge for research or the challenge for policymakers? And maybe that's something we'll find out when we're listening to you. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to the talks, and I would just briefly introduce all four of you, and then my suggestion is that you would give your talks one after the other, and then we have questions when you've finished. So the first one will be Cristina Chaminade, a professor in innovation studies at Circle. Then we've changed the order just slightly, so the second speaker will be Simona Yamarino, from a professor in economic geography and also, I think, head of the Department of Economic Geography and Environment at the LSE. Then we have Roberta Rabalotti, professor in economics at the University of Pavia, and finally Elisa Giuliani, guest professor at Circle and also a professor at Pisa, University of Pisa. So I would ask you, I've seen your presentation, so I'm not worried about the time, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. So, Cristina, if you would like to start.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Cristina Chaminade, and I'm one of the professors in innovation studies at Circle. And I'm going to deviate a little bit. I'm going to go back to the topic, but I just wanted to say that today is a very special day for me. Also because I was one of the first ones employed at Circle 10 years ago. And it was I think that is quite representative of the things that have been presented this morning by Merrick, by Bjorn, and by Charles, because I was a woman, so minority, and also coming from a very obscure university in Spain. And nonetheless, I was very welcome in Sweden and very welcome at Circle from the very beginning, where I have developed my career in the last 10 years. And I do work with globalization of innovation, and what I'm going to present today is related to that topic, of course. And the main objective of this presentation is to discuss how can innovation studies address the challenge of increased globalization of economic activities. And I'm going to argue that innovation studies can actually provide new concepts and new theories that can better capture the dynamics, but also provide evidence, research-based evidence for policy making, much better than other disciplines around us. And I'm going to start by convincing you of why globalization of innovation is important. And we know that globalization of economic activities has been quite relevant for many, many years. But over the last decade, we have witnessed an incredible increase in the globalization of innovation-related activities. and that was acknowledged by the UNCTAD already in the mid-2000. And this is due to a combination of very complex forces, so some centripetal forces, some centrifugal forces, some forces related to an increased complexity of knowledge and technology, the increased needs of organizations to recombine knowledge that is in close proximity but also far away, and also related to how this knowledge is being now globally distributed in different locations around the world. So it is internal but also external, some pull and push factors, which makes the analysis of globalization of innovation a very complex one. We know that organizations are using a variety of instruments to access that knowledge at different geographical distances. And from a perspective of academia, or scholars have been using a variety of concepts to capture those dynamics of innovation at a global scale, from global value chain to global production networks to global innovation networks. What I'm going to argue here is that some concepts are better endowed to capture those dynamics than others. And what we have seen lately is a kind of conceptual stretching in which we are trying to use some concepts that were developed in different disciplines to actually capture innovation dynamics. And what I'm going to question here is whether those are the adequate concepts or whether we need to combine them with some insights that actually innovation studies can provide. So let me go one by one to each these three concepts: global value chain, global production networks, and global innovation networks. First of all, about global value chain. Global value chain emerged in the mid-90s with the purpose of explaining upgrading of firms, indigenous firms in developing countries that were linked to multinational companies as suppliers. The main focus of global value chains has always been on the distribution of value and how value is being captured in certain relations and by certain firms within this supply chain. There is quite a strong focus on lead firms, and I think that most of the research has been focusing on multinational companies and lead firms as the only actor of globalization of innovation activities. Innovation has been introduced in the global value chain literature in three different ways. One way by looking at how upgrading towards more skill-intensive activities is taking place. A second way in which is the pioneer work, I think, of Roberta Rabelotti and Carlo Pietrobelli, trying to look at how different governance types within the global value chain facilitate different forms of learning. And a third way in which the concept of global value chain has been applied to high-tech industries, where the authors claim that they are mapping global innovation dynamics when in reality they are still capturing value distribution in high-tech industries. For me, the main limitation of these concepts when we are trying to understand innovation dynamics at a global scale continues to be the fact that they are focusing on value creation and not on innovation and how innovations are being generated. What are the different factors that affect those innovation dynamics? They do not bring, in general, micro insights of why do firms locate innovation activities in different regions around the world. And there is very little attention to the embeddedness of those supply chains in different institutional settings and territories. And I would argue that those are some of the issues that innovation studies can bring on the table in dialogue with global value chain. And finally, the empirical studies have been hitherto rather static, more looking at the snapshots of global value chain and at one point in time, than rather trying to understand why and under which circumstances global value chains may evolve in the future. So they provide a very limited tool to actually forecast what is going to happen in the future in terms of innovation, where are innovation activities going to be located, and how we might expect innovation dynamics to change over time and across the globe. Global production network is another concept that is being used now to capture innovation dynamics. This concept emerged in the mid-2000s with the purpose of analyzing the global distribution of production activities. Again, not innovation activities. The key concept, despite it is networks in the concept, a lot of the empirical analysis has been based again on lead firms and how different production is being distributed around the world and who are the main actors, the main lead firms in those global production networks. They include as an advantage the embeddedness in territories, which is something that global value chain didn't do in the past, and I think that is something that innovation studies can bring as well on the table. Innovation has been incorporated in two ways. On the one hand, because R&D is a function of production. So it is being thought and conceptualized that innovation follows production, more or less. And on the other hand, because global production network as a concept has been used and applied to high-tech industries as global value chain, and again, it has been claimed that they are mapping innovation networks, when in reality, again, they are mapping production and R&D related functions related to production around the world. Again, for me, a very fundamental limitation of this concept is that innovation is not the focus of global production networks. And it rather assumes that innovation overlaps with production. And while this is the case in some industries, definitely so, it is not the case in all industries. And we can assume and we can see that in some industries, the global innovation network may actually not overlap in terms of factors, in terms of networks, or in terms of territories with the global production network. I think that there is also another limitation in general in the literature on global production network, which is rather static, with some exception of new literature that is coming up now or forthcoming on the changing and the dynamics of global production network. And I'm referring to an article of Henry Young forthcoming in economic geography. About what can innovation bring to the table? Innovation has brought to the table the concept of global innovation network. And it is not a radically different concept from global value chain and global innovation, global production networks, but it brings some of the elements that it was lacking in global value chain and global production networks. It is based on the idea, it is specifically focusing on innovation and knowledge exchange, and is based on the idea that innovation is becoming highly complex, and we have different models of innovation which are being located in different places around the world. The main characteristics of global innovation networks are highly embedded in the innovation system literature and bring together innovation system literature and network theory. Or at least, I mean, that is one of the lines of future research in this area. The main characteristics or the main pillars is that it is looking at innovation dynamics. The focus is on how innovation is developed, how knowledge is exchanged. So knowledge exchange and knowledge linkages as the basis for innovation. The second element is the focus on networks and not necessarily hierarchies as in global value chain, or supply chains, or only one type of dual relationship, but looking at the network as a whole. And why is this important? If we look at the network as a whole, we may discover that the main agents of change may not be lead firms, or they may be networks, for example, of small and medium-sized enterprises. And finally, last but not least, is the focus on the territories, the link or the idea that those global innovation networks are hubbed in particular locations around the world, and explicitly bringing the role of institutions, both within the network to explain why different actors may connect and may exchange knowledge, but also outside the network on how institutions will shape the configuration and the dynamics of those networks. Some examples of the new research agenda or issues that global innovation networks can address. And these are some examples of things that are currently being done at Circle in a group of colleagues. One example is on trying to understand the dynamics of a strategic coupling between global knowledge networks and territories. And we are doing so by adopting a multi-level approach in which we are looking at the characteristics of knowledge, for example, in terms of the transferability, but also the appropriability of knowledge, by looking at firm characteristics, that is the capability of the firm to access knowledge, to absorb knowledge, to participate in networks, the characteristics of the region in which those firms and other organizations are embedded in terms of availability of knowledge. So by taking a multi-level perspective, we are able to understand much better the dynamics of globalization of innovation, but also under which conditions we may expect networks to be established at local level or at global level, and how the knowledge may be combined. The second interesting topic that we are dealing with is understanding the evolution of global innovation networks by looking at the microdynamics. Microdynamics of firm-based decision, and we want to look at competences, strategies, and routines, but also linked to the different characteristics of knowledge. So, to conclude, to wrap up, we go back to the main question: how can innovation studies help address this challenge of globalization, and particularly globalization of innovation? I think that we can address, or we can help address, by providing more nuanced concepts and theories that can capture the dynamics of innovation and knowledge creation and its geography. Moving from existing concepts that bring more static view towards a more dynamic view, more change. Moving from concepts that focus on value and production to concepts that work on innovation and the specific characteristics of knowledge creation processes, which are different from production. And then embed that discussion, not have it in the air, but embed it in territories and institutions. And that is only possible by taking this multi-level, but also this multi-scalar approach to innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristina. Then we move right on to Simona Yamarino.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a big occasion and an honor to be here. And it's a particular, I would say a historical circumstance even for myself, because it's an entirely female panel, which in 25 years of experience is the first time that I experience, so that's a good innovation. And my talk is on the local impact of multinational enterprises, and obviously the question was precisely the same one addressed by Cristina, on how innovation studies can contribute to understand this. Now, what do we know about multinational? Everybody knows quite a lot. There is a huge literature, particularly in the international business study tradition, but also some of the scholars have been innovation scholars in the 80s and 90s in particular. We know quite a lot about the determinants and strategies of multinational corporations, particularly why they become multinationals, where they go, generally speaking, at the macro geographical level, because it comes from a sort of inheritance we had from international trade theory, and how do organize their production and innovation networks. On the other hand, the common address question has been that on impact, what is the impact of multinational on the home economy, on the host economy, on the multinational itself, in particular, where exactly? Particularly, I mean, in the effort of going out of this international economics mainstream kind of tradition, where exactly, in which regions, multinational contribute to development and growth. Now, we know a lot on one side, we know much less on the other side. And this is my claim, is precisely where we can contribute, also because it's becoming quite embarrassing in terms of policy and policy suggestions that we can give as academics. Now, so what we know much less is, in general, the specific geography and the heterogeneity of places, and obviously the actors that are representing different regions and different local systems. And this heterogeneity of places is actually becoming more and more important for EMNEs choices, exactly as EMNEs are becoming more and more important in terms of spurring innovation and local economic development. Now, we can see, and we have seen, that there are very different geographies emerging in relation of different multinational kind of structures. I mean that, you know, intra-firm at the level of multinational can be actually quite centralized or decentralized in terms of control. There is increasingly this unbundling of function, headquarters, R&D, production, logistic are all distributed in very different ways. So heterogeneity of firms, and particularly of multinationals, has come progressively into the picture. What we have, however, is that this geography, specific geography of multinational in their production and innovation networks is more virtual than real. And this is why, in fact, we cannot be very helpful in putting a sort of platform and base to inform policymakers and more practically oriented practitioners. I will use two examples here of research, innovation research, that is trying to address this story of the impact. The first example is on the impact of inward foreign direct investment coming into a specific context, that is the one of the UK, and the impact on domestic firms' innovation. In this work, the main research question is precisely, do multinational enterprises, have an impact, and how on the innovative activities of domestic firms and regions and industries, and we look at the impact of EMNEs, particularly with respect to intra-industry, so the same sector, main sector of the multinationals, the same industry. The results that we get is that foreign firms are obviously carried, with them, externalities, positive externalities in the recipients' industries and regions, places. However, their effect varies greatly according to the typologies of domestic firms. And this positive impact of inward investment is particularly pronounced, is particularly positive in the case of less internationalized firms, which is quite an interesting result. Obviously, I'm talking about the UK context, right? So everything has to be put in a sort of context for obvious reasons, but it is precisely those firms that are less able to connect to global market and global network that benefits the most in terms of spillovers. The data used, and this is important, I put the data, and I won't obviously go into technicalities here, But the problem that we have had until recently is lack of data. And this is why innovation studies couldn't actually contribute so much in giving policy responses. What we did, and we are starting increasingly to do with colleagues in different communities, is to merge microdata, different data sets, in order to have a clear vision. But these data sets have become available, are still in progress in terms of also National Institute of Statistics. So in this case, for example, we put together the annual inquiry into foreign direct investment and the firm level database, firm level, you know, the annual respondent database that covers, is the biggest inquiry in firms, business firms in the UK. And on the domestic side, we use the Community Innovation Survey. I mean, only to merge the first two database, microdata, took something like 2 years. So, I mean, just to give you the idea of the difficulties that we encounter. And we use, obviously, also methodologies that are adequate to tackle these problems, tackling heterogeneity, tackling, in particular, the sort of circularity and therefore problems of endogeneity that we have normally in this kind of studies. So the main conclusion is of this piece of evidence is that, you know, we have to model the emergence of positive externalities as a two-way relationship. So it's not only dependent on the diversity of multinationals, but it's also the diversity of local domestic firms that matters a lot. And that obviously, after always controlling for absorptive capacity, that is a critical factor in absorbing this pipeline of general capabilities in production and innovation, what matters is to look also at other variables and extent of internationalization of domestic firms. So further research, in this case beyond the UK, along this line would be essential to design more solid, sound kind of guidelines for policy, regional policy making. The second piece of evidence is on the outward side, and the impact of relocation abroad on local employment profiles, so dealing more with the skill side of the relocation of production. The research question in this sense is, did multinationals located in the UK, so both foreign and domestic owned, investment elsewhere, generate some kind of creation, destruction of different typologies of job tasks, particularly referring to Enrico Moretti, that was quoted also by Martin this morning in his book 2012, referring to the routinary versus non-routinary kind of job tasks. So we look at the geography of local labor market areas in Britain, and the analysis that is actually quite explorative for the moment, but we are getting there, suggests that the impact of outward investment obviously is consistently negative on routinary job tasks and positive on non-routinary job tasks. So this is, there is a double effect of job profile creation and destruction at the same time. And this heterogeneity, however, heterogeneity again emerges looking at different industries, typology of investment in the recipient local economies. So heterogeneity is another big dimension in both inward and outward studies. So again here we merged a lot of different data sets. Again, it's been a very labor-intensive work. Here we used for employment in particular data on occupation and wages at the level of travel to work areas in the UK, and also we used labor force survey. Again, with using empirical strategies that try to address also the most common problems that we encounter in this sort of empirical analysis. The stylized facts is quite common. This picture that I give here for developed countries is that you see a surge of foreign direct investment outwards towards developing countries. So which is the effect of that in terms of typologies of jobs? What we preliminary conclude is that when you take into account the specific geography, the impact of outward is significantly negative for routinary job tasks. So both in manual and cognitive occupations. So this is not a matter simply of low tech, high tech. And this kind of distinctions are also becoming quite obsolete. The negative impact obviously is related to regions that are present some kind of obsolescence in their own economic structure, or skills shortage, or skills mismatched. So this all is telling us a lot in terms of regional divergence. And you can see on the other hand also the critical importance of multinational global network for industrial restructuring and upgrading through new knowledge, capabilities, skills, and integration of the geographical dimension in these international networks can be a part, integrating part of a sort of new open innovation regional policy that so far has been completely separated from, you know, local development policies in the traditional sense. Again, we need more research-based evidence in order to inform policymakers on how to, in a way, take advantage of this global to spur innovation and renew skills at the local level, particularly in those regions that are affected by decline and slow growth, with all the implication also in terms of polarization of income and well-being. So this is my statement for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And then we move straight on to Roberta Rabelotti.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Thank you very much to Circle and to the organizers of this conference for inviting me to participate to this all-women panel. It's really a pleasure for me too, I must say. I have been given the task to talk about emerging market multinationals. So my talk is really following up what Simona has just told us. To talk about emerging market multinational, I think it's important just to give you some figures about the size of this recently increasing phenomenon. Emerging market flows from emerging market going to the rest of the world has now reached 30% of global direct investment flows. And the main players are, of course, China, India, and Russia. But it's important to say that there are some projections say that this year, for China, global outflows will exceed investment inflows. So you know that China is the most important recipient of investment from the rest of the world, and this year probably the outflows will exceed the inflows. So if we try to see where these investments are going, we can see that the advanced countries are taking a quite relevant share of this investment. And in particular, Europe is receiving about 35% of this investment. And in fact, I must say that in Europe, the issue of emerging market multinational, what this multinationals are doing is becoming a really hot topic. And the sentiment, the attitude with respect to this multinational is very mixed. It's very mixed because there is a diffused fear that these multinationals are coming to Europe just to acquire the European technology, and they will just acquire companies, take the technology, and leave, basically leaving nothing behind them, not having any kind of positive impact on economic growth and employment. But at the same time, given the economic crisis, the fresh capital coming from this multinational is, of course, very welcome. And above all, this is happening when the companies acquired are companies in financial distress. So there is really this kind of sentiment which is not very clear. And because of this unclear sentiment, it's important to try to understand and try to address the issue of what do we know about emerging multinational from emerging countries. Well, I think that we know quite a lot already, and because the issue of multinational from emerging countries has been really rapidly reaching the attention, above all in the international business literature. In this particular literature, the main topic has been try to understand if the analytical framework, which has been developed since the last decades for understanding the behavior of traditional multinationals, is suitable for understanding what these emerging multinationals are doing. And this is the big issue in this particular literature. But there are also some generalized agreement. First of all, it's quite clear that the ownership advantages of these emerging multinationals are quite different from the traditional ownership advantages of traditional multinationals. And it's also quite clear that differently from what is typically done by advanced country multinationals, many of these multinationals are internationalizing because they want to acquire strategic asset seeking. So they don't internationalize to exploit their assets, but they internationalize because they want to acquire new assets. And there is another widely issue which is agreed in this literature is about motivations. These emerging multinationals, when they go to advanced countries, they go there because they want to, for strategic asset-seeking reason and for market-seeking reason. So given what we know about this multinational, the question I was asked to try to address is what innovation studies can apport to this issue, and what we would like to know more about emerging multinational, and how innovation studies could help us in knowing more. I think that there are two main issues on which we don't know much so far. And the first issue is the impact on the host economies. As I was saying at the beginning, there is this idea that these multinationals are just coming to advanced countries, and what they want is to acquire technology. And but there is not much empirical evidence behind this common wisdom. It's important to understand if it's true, or rather it is, we can have a kind of more positive view with respect to this investment. And the second point, which I think is very much important, is the impact of this investment on the home economies. So the other idea, general idea, is that these multinationals invest in European companies, and through this investment, they improve their technological capability. But there is not much empirical evidence showing if this is really true. So it is true that through this investment, these multinationals are really able able to move on, to catch up, to speed up the process from production to innovation. I think that innovation studies can be very helpful in terms of addressing these two issues. And in order to understand how, I would like to provide you two examples of research which has been done and which I've been involved together with Elisa Giuliani on addressing these two issues. So first of all, a survey which was done on a sample of multinationals from emerging countries investing in Italy and Germany and specialized in the machinery sector, together with a control sample of multinationals from advanced countries in the same sector and investing in the same countries. So what we have done is to build a typology of this multinational based on two dimensions. The first dimension is the direction of knowledge flows between the headquarters and the subsidiaries, and the second dimension is the extent to which the subsidiaries participate in the local innovation networks. The result of this research effort has been that we could confirm that in fact it's true. There are emerging market multinationals having a kind of predatory attitude. So it is true that there are emerging market multinationals coming to Europe and just acquiring knowledge that they try to transfer back to the home countries. But it's also true that there is a large group of multinationals from emerging countries having a very different attitude. What they have is an attitude which we have defined as win-win. So somehow they are trying to transfer knowledge back to the home countries, but they are at the same time trying to build up, to be locally embedded, to build up local innovation activity in connection with the local innovation systems. And it's important to remark that in our study, it appeared that this kind of win-win attitude is much more common among emerging market multinationals rather than the traditional type of multinational from advanced country. And so what we think is that we can draw some policy implication from that. We think that it is very important for policymakers to have in mind that they should try to create a local innovation system and to favor the networking between these emerging market multinational and the local innovation networks, because this is favoring a kind of more mutual strategy of learning among multinational and local actors. The second research is addressing the issue about the impact on the home economies. This has been done using patent data, and what we have done is to investigate cross-border innovation between inventors in Brazil, India, and China, and inventors in European countries. So we have investigated this type of invention in which there are international teams and in which inventors from these countries are collaborating with inventors from European countries. And what we have found is that cross-border inventions between big actors and European actors are still a rather limited phenomenon, but is growing rapidly. But what is probably more important to remark is that the quality of cross-border innovation. The quality of cross-border innovation is definitely higher than the quality of domestic innovation. In which sense? In the sense that cross-border innovation receive more citation, and cross-border innovation are more general with respect to domestic innovation. So on the basis of this result, we can draw the implication that the cross-border information do represent opportunity for big firms to accumulate technological capabilities and access frontier knowledge. It's also important to remark that we have also checked for inventors in multinational from emerging countries with respect to inventors from domestic firms in big countries. And it's interesting to see that multinational companies from this country are benefiting more with respect to domestic firms. And this could be explained by the ability, the better ability of these companies to get involved in international networks. So coming to the end of my talk, I would like to conclude that the use of patent is very fruitful in terms of the possibility to address the issue of the impact of this multinational both on the home and on the host countries. And going back to what Simona was saying in the conclusion of her talk, I also think that there is a huge problem in terms of data. The research we are now starting is the result of a huge effort in putting together information, data about FDIs, greenfield and acquisition, and patent data. So now what we are starting to do, and at the moment we are just focusing on acquisition, is trying to investigate the impact of acquisition from emerging market, acquisition made by of European firms made by multinational from emerging countries. And what we would like to investigate is, on one side, the impact of this acquisition on the patenting activity of the acquired companies, and on the other side, the impact on the patenting activities of the acquiring companies. So just to understand what is the impact of this acquisition. And this is possible because of this mixing of two different kind of sources of data, which normally are used separately. So you could find, as in fact we have done so far, you have studied using patent data, or rather FDI. So what we are now trying to do is to use these two data sources together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we finish the panel with Elisa Giuliani.
Yes, good afternoon, and I'm Elisa Giuliani. I consider myself a small daughter of Circle then. I'm here as a as a 20% guest full professor of innovation studies for 1 year and a half now. Else I'm at the University of Pisa. And Christina, who organized the panel, as well as the other Circle members, gave me this very challenging topic to discuss: how can innovation studies help understanding how EMNEs influence the globalization of good and bad social practices? In fact, it's a great opportunity or an honor for me to discuss this with you, because this is a very nascent, small, emergent research niche area of research of mine. So this is so good for me to discuss with you. Let me, however, rephrase a little bit what Christina assigned me to discuss into what has innovation to do with the social, or as I normally call it, human rights conduct of multinational corporations. So what I'm trying to do here in this following 10 minutes is discuss or persuade you that these two apparently very different and diverse worlds have some connections, what the connections are, what we know already, and especially what we don't know and what we need to know, and then to discuss how innovation studies really can help and whether it helps actually. So let me start by saying that innovation that is the generation of something new, be it radical or incremental, we know all about it, has been traditionally widely celebrated as an engine of growth, of economic growth. And more recently, innovation concepts have been used to explain or to understand a big global challenge, the challenge of climate change. So all the studies on transformative change, socio-technical transitions are using some innovation concepts to address this big challenge. And you will see that in the next panel. However, my contention here is that there is another grand challenge that we need to address, and that has to do with the way and the capacity of making global business, international business, multinational corporations' operations around the globe more sustainable. And by sustainable, socially sustainable. And by socially sustainable here, I refer to a business that is more respectful of human rights. And I take the Human Rights Declaration as a benchmark. I don't do it just, I do it because there is a growing discourse in the academia and in the policy-making arena about the importance of international firms to respect human rights. And you probably know, you probably are aware, or I will introduce it for the first time here, about the guiding principles of the United Nations on business and human rights. And basically, what they say is that corporations operating around the globe are requested and should abide and should respect human rights. And when they define the concept of human rights, they use the Universal Declaration and subsequent covenants. That means that basically we set an international standard in terms of respect for international firms. So the human rights go beyond national law. So in cases of weak national regulations or absent national regulations, international firms should look at those international standards. And the rights that are relevant for multinational corporations are, of course, workers' rights, but also rights to health of nearby communities where operations take place, rights of indigenous communities not to be displaced, think about the mining industry, rights of consumers and health and all the health-related issues. So what has, however, innovation to do with all of these, okay? That's the question. If you believe in the Boston Consulting Group Global Innovation Survey, and you take the 50 most innovative firms in the world, these are 2014 rankings, you find big names that you all know. These firms are employing the brightest minds in the world, we suspect or we expect. These firms are producing radical innovation. Some of them have produced very important innovation that has changed our lives, our behaviors, our societal habits. They have opened up new frontiers in knowledge. They are opening up new opportunities for thinking and for doing things and for behaving. But at the same time, they are sometimes in other parts of their activities, that is production and distribution, they are sometimes rather rudimentary organizations. To obtain efficiency gains or to access scarce resources, they sometimes, and there is a lot of track records on that, even in the recent past, infringe on a number of rights, workers' rights, rights to health of local communities, you name them. And there are specialized agencies tracking all these bad social practices, if you want. However, if we exclude this anecdotal evidence, we know very little, actually, about the relationship between innovation, so creating something grand for the world and for us, and then these real practices in production and distribution. And so we know very little about innovation and the human rights conduct of multinational firms. There are, however, 3 strands of research that deal more or less directly with these issues. And I will discuss each of them and also highlight what are the open research issues and questions connected to that. And then I will conclude on how I think innovation studies can address this research question, this grand challenge. So there's one strand of research that looks at social innovation, bottom of the pyramid innovation, frugal innovation, eco if you want, or green innovation. That is trying to understand why or how firms manage to address societal concerns. Think about poverty and pro-poor type of innovation. So how firms manage on a positive side to create products and services that address societal needs. And so there's a huge and growing literature emphasizing that. We all know probably this literature. We scholars are trying to figure out how this is compatible with financial sustainability of firms. However, this literature is not does not fully help in understanding the real human rights conduct of firms, because firms on the one side may well do social innovation, but at the same time they may use child labor to produce that social innovation. And this is a very well phenomenon known as strategic decoupling in the management literature. And it's been documented that firms use this type of two-way management practices to obtain gains. The second strand of research is more connected with what also Christina before was discussing on global value chains. So there is a new frontier of global value chain analysis in which scholars are trying to understand whether upgrading processes or upgrading the product, improving the innovation capacities of local suppliers in global value chains also comes with improvement in workers' rights. So what they call social upgrading. Results are mixed. Actually, most of the results are saying, also the studies existing are saying, well, they don't go together. So even if they upgrade, if suppliers upgrade their product and their processes, that the workers' rights don't get better. So the issue then is now no longer on whether it's good or bad, or the two go together, but under what conditions they may improve together. And then finally, there is a third strand of research which is more embedded into the management as well as international business literatures. So you see there is a vast community going around this topic, tackling different angles. And this third research area is basically trying to understand if there is a relationship between corporate social responsibility, that is, if you want, a more narrow concept as compared to human rights conduct, and innovation. And it's basically saying, well, there might be a trade-off between the two. So firms that invest a lot in corporate social responsibility policies are subtracting resources from innovation. Therefore, they are privileging something and then taking away money from innovation. And therefore, this can be detrimental. Others think instead that investing in CSR also bring about new opportunities in terms of market, and therefore we stimulate innovation further. So again, this is an open research question. Nobody has an answer to that. So to conclude, innovation-related research, as you can see from different angles, has opened these questions as no answer so far. Most of this research is very recent, as you can see. It's very open. Discussion is still ongoing. However, from my perspective, being by training an innovation scholar and having become closer to these social issues more recently, I can say that innovation studies alone may not be sufficient to explain how multinational firms contribute to the diffusion of good or bad social practices. Definitely, it's an important component of it, but it has to be integrated with neo-institutional theories, for instance, with international business, with business ethics, so ethicality of business is also another issue there. And definitely, I think that's a challenge also for Circle if there are people who want to pursue this further, because Circle is the right environment. In the first panel on the opening talk, there was this remark that Circle is a very multidisciplinary place, and therefore, integrating innovation with international business or with other disciplines should not be so much difficult given the background that Circle has, and I would welcome that direction to be pursued further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank the four panelists for what I think were extremely clear and also relevant presentations. And from I understood when I arrived that my role was to sort of tie this a little bit into policymaking. And I would say that all four presentations, in my eyes, have a very clear relevance for policy making, looking at the impact of EMNEs, of inward and outward direct FDI. I think this is something that policymakers talk about a lot. But also what you just mentioned, for perhaps the role of foreign SMEs in social upgrading and foreign EMNEs, not SMEs, EMNEs, innovation activities in social upgrading. I think this is also a very policy relevant. I would like to invite questions while you're preparing your questions. I have a lot of comments. Perhaps two reflections. One is I think the presentation of Roberto was very interesting on the emerging markets EMNEs. The interesting thing there is that, of course, I think there's big differences between Chinese and Indian EMNEs in the way, I mean, first of all, in the ownership structures, but also in the industries and in perhaps what they're targeting. And then, so the first thing is, like, you know, do you see, can we sort of put them in one basket, the emerging EMNEs? Also, the changing nature of, for example, the Chinese outward foreign direct investment, which began by very much strong state-owned foreign direct investment and now is moving to private firms, if that might change your, and perhaps the general question to the panel, we talked a lot about you talked a lot about the growing internationalization, globalization of innovation, these trends of outward and inward foreign direct investment. And I guess my question would be, will this trend sort of, what do you see happening in this trend? Is it going to increase for a long time? Do we see a saturation? And also, you mentioned the skepticism towards, for example, Chinese firms in Europe. But you know, we also see a similar skepticism, increasing skepticism towards foreign EMNEs in China. The same argument, saying that they're basically stealing the best human capital and they're not leaving any mark on the global innovation activity. So is there a danger that policy might also see some kind of reversal in terms of FDI policies? And then I have another big question, which is, I'm being a little bit mean, but the title of the panel was "The Challenge of Responding to the Increasing Globalization of Economic Activities and Mobility of Talent." And the mobility of talent we haven't really talked about in these presentations. And the reason I'm bringing it up is, again, from the point of view of the policymaker. Sweden has a lot of extremely global EMNEs. But I would argue that Sweden's big challenge today is that we haven't seen the effect of the increasing globalization of innovation through the immigration of talent to Sweden, and that there seems to be a disconnect. And one of the reasons I'm saying that is because Sweden, for example, in the OECD has the highest gap in employment rates between foreign-born and domestic-born, and this gap is still the highest even when you look at the highly educated immigrants. So perhaps what's missing in this discussion is maybe the whole research by Annalise Saxenian and the role of the mobility of people in the globalization of innovation, and perhaps how that might be linked also to EMNEs activities. So I'm just throwing these out. I don't know if you want to, perhaps we do a quick round, and then by then hopefully you're warmed up for questions. Please.
Yeah, I might actually say a few words, if Roberta allows me, on the difference between Chinese and Indians, because I mean that was one of the things that we have been discussing in this project on emerging multinationals, and for us it was there was a huge difference between Chinese and Indian multinationals, also in the way that they approach Europe and the strategy that they are following in Europe, and the way that they are setting the subsidiaries and the relationship that those subsidiaries have with the headquarters. And we were looking at different strategies and different impact of the companies, and in a very limited selection of cases. But we also saw that in the case of investments of Chinese multinationals, they tend to give much more autonomy to the subsidiaries, which leads in much more win-win situations, in which, because they have autonomy in the technological strategy as well as administrative procedures, they tend to increase the technological capabilities over time, while many of the investments of Indian companies end up with the killing of the European company, asset stripping or reducing of capabilities over time because of the imposure of networks and strategies of the headquarters or from the headquarters. About the mobility, yes, I was aware actually that at the end the composition of the panel didn't have the mobility of talented people, and I think that is a very critical issue that it's a very critical issue that innovation studies can also contribute to. Yes. And I think that there is a lot to say on how the mobility of particular skills actually contributes to the growth of different regions across the globe, but also on how those mobility seen as one type of network combines with other types of networks, global production networks or research collaboration. I mean, how they are enablers, for example, for the emergence of other types of networks over time. So I think that this is definitely one very promising area of research in the future.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if, yeah. In terms of trends, increasing trends, this is my certainty, right? I mean, particularly in the process of outward investment from Europe towards particularly developing and emerging economies is just production conditions that are, at least for the foreseeable future, you cannot really stop that. In terms of the policies to be implemented in order to tackle with this problem, the issue is serious because there are three dimensions, basically, that is territorial divergence across Europe, which is clear, combining the plus and minus across different, empirical analysis. Increasing inequality at the individual level, precisely because of the destruction of some kind of jobs, and instead the concentration of others in core regions only, and also therefore salaries across categories of individuals, and generally speaking, an increasing social fragmentation, I would say. So, I mean, there is a very urgent need of putting in place regional policies that are integrating the openness in this sense. For the impact on emerging economies, the picture is quite diversified and different. So it's two different sets of policies and recommendations. They cannot be treated, as also my colleagues have said. One only remark is that, as I pointed out, there is this big issue of heterogeneity. It depends on which multinationals. Across industries, the impact varies a lot. If you look at Chinese investment in Africa, extraction sectors is a completely different story, and there Elisa's arguments become really the main ones. So it depends on the level of development that you are. So this heterogeneity has to be incorporated in empirical analysis and also probably better conceptualized. Immigration of talent, I think, is such a big issue that couldn't be coupled with another big issue. Yes. So it was probably a bit misleading from the beginning to put them together.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that well, I agree very much with what Simona was saying about the heterogeneity of multinationals, which I think that is the heterogeneity both from the home country perspective, but also from the host country's perspective. What I can say with regard to China is that I think China is definitely, I mean, this is quite clear, the evolution of what Chinese multinationals are doing abroad. So they are learning very quickly. So I don't really see a decrease in their external presence. I would say that we can expect an increase, but not only from the quantitative point of view, but also from the qualitative point of view. That's quite clear also in terms of the state policy. So I think this is quite clear. this is quite clear also if we try to understand what is happening inside China. So also from the point of view of receiving investment, the attitude is changing. So at the beginning they were receiving any kind of investment, now they are picking, and they are starting to be much more picking in terms of what they want to receive and also what they get from this investment. So I think that we will see an evolution from this point of view. And what is typical of China, we see this evolution very rapid. So anything is happening in China is happening in big size and very rapidly. In terms of the mobility of talent, I think this is, I mean, yes, we haven't talked much about it, but I think that from this point of view, innovation studies have a lot to do because, I mean, also when we talk about what multinational can provide to the host economies, or we are, at the end of the day, we are always talking about the knowledge flows between individuals. I mean, when I was talking about cross-border invention, in fact, it's collaboration between inventors. And I think this is very important, and so we can draw very relevant implications from the innovation study from this point of view. I think that what we should probably, and this from the policy point of view, take more into account is, or change the attitude, and somehow, I don't know, but it seems that the emerging countries are much more rapid in getting this than European country, is that these exchanges between individuals can always be mutual. So, in fact, the European attitude is that we tend to be afraid of what is foreigner, and instead the emerging countries, it seems that they are learning very quickly that they can always learn something, and so to change this attitude could be probably very positive and probably very effective also from the point of view of European countries in general, I would say.
Thank you. Elisa.
Maybe I can just complement that, connected to what Roberta was saying on emerging market multinationals and connected to my speech here, is the concern of whether the growing investments of multinational corporations from emerging markets into Europe creates or raises concerns about their social conduct when they're here, okay? So because the assumption is that they're coming from weak institutional environments, that would misbehave more often than would advanced countries corporations would. We don't know that yet. So there's a big question mark again, and this is one of my areas of future research to address this. And I think that's also a very important policy question here, because then we have to try to understand whether they will adapt to our institutional environment, laws and regulations, or whether they would try to, especially in this phase of economic crisis in which we are losing control of many of our welfare institutions and building blocks that can be detrimental, might be detrimental, and then may become a concern for us, I think.
Thank you very much. I saw there's a question here. I was just going to ask, are there any other questions? Because I will do as in the previous panel. Maybe we'll take 2 or 3, and then we'll give the panel. Okay, one back there. Any more? Then we'll start. Yeah, sir. So start here, please.
Yeah. Davide Castellani. I'm a guest professor here at Circle. Let me start by saying that it's true that we haven't talked about mobility of talents, but the panel is a manifestation that talent move.
That's true.
From Italy.
No, but,
there are a few here.
I wanted to make a comment which links Michaela, the final point made by Michaela in the previous panel, and some of the points raised here, especially by Simona. I have the feeling that if we look at regional evolution or path creation or renewal, or let's say structural change, using a term and an old word, has been explained mainly by looking inside the region, and the integration of regions in the world economy is much less addressed in the literature. Instead, There's nothing preventing this to be addressed in theory. International trade has been developed looking at nations simply because data were available at nations, but I mean, we are considering the US as one nation and the EU as a collection of nations. So in principle, we should start thinking more seriously about how regions integrate in the world economy. Exactly. And at Circle, there are a lot of competencies that can contribute in this direction. And I can see a lot of connection between the global innovation networks and the regional, say, resilience or upgrading. And I also think in this direction, there's a growing amount of large-scale data sets that can be used to address this point, not on a case study base, but on a more large-scale data. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, we won't have any trade data by regions for a long time, apart from Italy, where you guys know something about. But probably your paper is the only one that I know that looks at interregional trade. And I've done something on FDI at the regional level. You also have done, but there's very little. So I think that something should be done in this direction.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Then we have in the back.
I really liked all the presentations, and to see the knowledge flows and the interaction between the inventors and some of the win-win situations. But sometimes I felt it was focusing maybe a bit too much on knowledge, which is of course what we always do as innovation studies. But I would just like to repeat the question that, as I read in the program, which I guess links to the previous session on the economic crisis. So, does Europe need a new growth model in the wider context? We are not doing very well. We've lost competitiveness even long before the crisis. We can't compete on cost with many of the Asian countries. So the skill set is being hollowed out, the labor market is being eroded, we got sort of this hourglass model. So there's really deep worries. How can Europe survive and earn its way in the global context? That's how I read which of course knowledge is part of, but also it is part of the traditional questions on skills, on labor, on industries and production. Mm. So we can rephrase all those questions in knowledge, but I do feel a little bit we've not really addressed the question that I thought was the one for this panel. How does Europe, how do we compete in the world? Do we need a new growth model? What does innovation studies have to say about this?
Okay, thank you. And then Susanna.
I'm tweeting what you're saying, so that's why I'm behind my screens. But I'm very attentive to what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I would like to somehow pick up what Sylvia's comments were in your presentations about open innovation policy. Because Simona answered, okay, just taking into consideration the mobility of talent is just so huge that, how to do that. And I couldn't avoid thinking about, what kind of elements will require an innovation policy to be open or not to be open? And what are the limits of openness? And I think that, that's a kind of big question. I don't have an answer, but at least I think that there will be at 4 elements, to be looking at. One is the kind of, issues of globalization of innovation of multinational companies, outward, inward FDIs, and how they are embedded or non-embedded, and the kind of, the routinary jobs or non-routinary jobs, effects on regional, local. That will be one effect. The mobility of talent, so individuals in and out, as you were saying, Sylvia, that will be another element. But at least I think that there will be some other elements. For example, access to non-European or researchers to European and national research facilities. That will be absolutely essential to see. There is some openness now, but I think that access will be absolutely crucial to create those kind of scientific networks more strongly. Another element that would be also a 4th element, I think, will be actually quite important, is to open more our research funding, national research funding, to each other. This is actually happening partly in the European level. It is actually, it's actually administratively very costly, I know, and it's actually done horizontally. So pooling resources into that, but then when we move outside Europe, this is actually not happening, because the only kind of, innovation or research and science agreements that we have with non-European partners are basically bilateral. So couldn't we integrate some of this kind of existing kind of joint programming initiatives and EMNEs plus whatever into a globalized context? So at least, I think that there are 4 elements that we could actually consider. And then again, what's the limit of openness? Obviously we are dealing with national taxpayers' money. So we need to kind of cross what is the kind of additional value for money that we get, and what is actually becoming kind of a little bit draining of our own resources. That's we should not be naive, and I think that's a little bit pick up from other kind of comment. We should not be naive either on those issues.
Thank you very much. So I think we have 3 questions. One on the question of regional integration, on the question of whether we phrased or over-focus on knowledge production in our role in the global economy, and then also this about the open innovation policy. So I'd ask the panelists, I think this will be the final round, to choose which of or all of these you would like to address.
We can start differently.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I agree completely with Davide on the inward-looking kind of bias of regional policies, and this is quite a distinctive element so far, has been both at national level and at the European level. So the purpose of the presentations, I think, was precisely to highlight the fact that policy have a very limited scope at the moment. Some failures are quite evident precisely because we haven't taken into account this fact of the open and interconnected regional development, which is absolutely critical. So I hope that there will be, with this new emergence of database and evidence, that precisely there has to be a sort of interaction and alignment. The question of Frank, how can we be more competitive? If I had known, I would be rich, as the people say. I mean, these are problematics. What we are studying is precisely where and how jobs or jobs typologies, skills, or entire sectors are destroyed, and where instead there is some sign of creation and some sign of upgrading, precisely in order to reconstruct the idea of European competitiveness that, as far as I know, has been in regional policies since 1975, when the regional policy at the European level started officially. So, I mean, it's a big question, but I think this panel has been, in a way, put under pressure to deal with. And then my final remark on the last question on international mobility. International mobility is another big area. And again, I mean, international mobility of graduates, actually, within the European Union, there are a lot of work, very, very good works done on international mobility. I contributed to that at the level of interregional mobility of talent, of graduates, postgraduates, and all these sort of things. But because we have an institutional kind of context that facilitates how to deal with openness of research institutions, openness of precisely institutions themselves at the global scale, I wouldn't comment on that because it's not my area, and it's, I think, a very broad issue, but it's much more institutional dependent because we don't have an international order supervising for this sort of kind of openness. We still depend on trade and FDI according to the mainstream economics kind of approach. So, I mean, with this, I pass.
Roberta, would you like?
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, on region and the use of regional database, I think I perfectly agree. So I will not comment more on that. I think that somehow the other two questions about how do, what is the role in terms of innovation of Europe in the world, and the following question about in policy, openness of the innovation policy are of course very much related. I also think that the first one is a very big question, and we can just try to provide some insights to this question. But somehow the second question is providing some insight to the first question, in the sense that I think that, I mean, I agree with Susanna in terms of that, I mean, there are a number of obvious channel for opening up innovation, and I think that what I was trying to say about multinational is very much related. So I mean, I think that to change the attitude of the in terms of the embeddedness of multinational is very important, and this can be supported through innovation policy instrument. I mean, I think that something can be done at the European regional level in terms of facilitating, for instance, the linkages between these multinational from emerging countries and the local innovation system, instead of taking a kind of more close attitude. And there are a number of instruments that we can think about. The other point is that in terms of the same is for mobility of talent. I think that what I was commenting before is probably applicable to this issue now. In terms of the last 2 points about the facilitation of a kind of more open approach in terms of research, I think that from this point of view, probably this is more the most advanced area already, because I think that at least on this, the European Union is already doing quite a good job. Because it has very much facilitated the creation of somehow a European research area, and it's also true that these, for instance, the European Call are more and more open to emerging countries. So I think that this is going in the right direction, and probably is also the easier thing to do, because researchers, they tend to collaborate, so it's probably not the most difficult part to create or to establish. It's much more difficult when you talk about firms, because the competitive aspects are always probably taking a more there is more the competitiveness aspect rather than the collaboration, which is taking the lead in this case. Well, I feel I will stop here.
Thank you. Then perhaps Elisa.
Yes. Well, I would just react to Frank Gill's question of what we need to do to have, what would be the new growth model in Europe if we need it, and so on. I mean, grand question, of course. I mean, my immediate reaction to that, and it's very maybe obvious, but I think it has not been done properly, is that beside maneuvering these macroeconomic, let's say, variables, I think what we need to do at the European level is to ensure that each single individual country has serious industrial policies in place. For instance, it's not the case for many countries. Italy is one, for instance. Because industrial policies give fruit maybe for after many, many years, and therefore politicians are not keen on investing on those type of policies, whereas they prefer something that gives some kind of more immediate impact, even if it's not then lasting for long. So that would be my first reaction, to really impose, let's say, I'm using a strong verb, but try to persuade countries to adopt really serious and coordinating industrial policies, where they also identify what are the strategic sectors in which they want to, both the public sector and the private sector to go, among which is green technologies, but not only. So, and this has to be coordinated among member states. Then there is an issue about attracting FDI. We know we are receiving a lot of FDI from advanced, but also growingly from emerging markets. We don't have a review process on what are good or bad investment. We are very liberal. We are accepting many investments without really bearing in mind the national security issues as well as the social and environmental negative issues that may come as a consequence of certain investment. And we need, again, to coordinate better in terms of attracting, but also selecting the good investments and maybe selecting out the bad investment or the riskier investment for our national security, for instance. This would be my first reaction to.
Thank you. And then we'll let Cristina finish.
Just very brief. I think that actually the point of Davide is related to the question of Frankel's in the sense. I mean, I fully agree with what Davide says. I think that is a very promising new venue of research to try to look at the integration of regions across the globe, so the local and the global, and how different regions and agents combine actually local knowledge with global knowledge. And I think that that is related also to what, I mean, an agenda that we want to develop, Michaela and I, on resilience of regions and new path creation, and what is the role of those global and local networks in actually creating new paths and new growth path models at the level of the regions. And I think that, I mean, there is a lot to do, I think, on this respect, on trying to look at knowledge networks. I'm sorry, but I still think that they are very, very important on how they create inputs for this path creation and path renewal in regions.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a very interesting panel. I'd like to thank all the four panelists and the audience, and I think we move straight on to the next session. Thank you very much.